I'm just saying that science is trying to identify where do we come from and how the thing work in the same way that the religious.
I think it's a difference between religion and science. Okay,
In school.
Yes, but then now you're assuming, because you say that science changes. So now, for example, the historians of now would say, okay, well, we find in history this. This is our explanation for it.
So, for example, we think about the difference between baby conception based on science and baby conception based on Quran.
Okay.
There is a difference, right?
First,
إن الدين عند الله الإسلام.
if I would ask you about the real foundation of life,
Yes.
so then you enter, of course, a bit of religion. What is your what do you think about the universe? About you are a Christian yourself, I think.
No, I had a Christian education and religion, spiritual teaching, but I went back from it, and because of my study and science interest, I'm very science-oriented. Evolution.
And why is science for you a reason to not be religious? Because for me as a Muslim, I understand from the Europeans' perspective, we have seen in the history, in the medieval period and afterwards with the scientific revolution, that the more science grew, the less the church became. So it has a certain history of contradiction. But for me as a Muslim, it's strange because we don't have this idea of science or religion. You know, science for us is the way we expand our knowledge about the universe.
Of course.
But religion is needed for you to have guidance in your life to an end goal.
Exactly.
So what is for you the reason that science took you off religion?
In science, we have also new science way. We have what we call
scientific method.
Scientific method, which is for experiment, etc. But there is also science philosophical thing, you know, actually the physics theory of why the world is done like this, etc. But yeah, sometimes it's lack of a link between philosophical and spiritual stuff related to the life.
Yeah.
So I think that religious text like the Quran or the Bible can bring something like this. The fact that the Quran, for example, is from another culture and much more recent, maybe 1,000 years more recent, I guess.
No, it's 600 years after Jesus.
Yes, exactly.
But for us, time is not relevant. You know why? Because if there is a creator, then time is irrelevant.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so for us, it's not that the Quran came 600 years after Jesus and therefore it has certain records which are not authentic about his life, because God knows about the past, God knows about the future. He knows. So there is an absolute entity who knows everything, and it doesn't matter whether it is tomorrow or yesterday. He knew exactly the same.
Yeah. On my point of view, time is much more is not fixed. It's something. It's a human base, you know. So time is not something which really exists. Like a space, yes, but time is really human conception, you know.
Okay, but then
so in the same way, that a god can overrule the time because he created time in the spiritual thinking. I think that there is some, in my conception, it's not a true god, but like a universe. It could be the god, you know, let's say. Have also his own conception of time. So in science, for example, when you go back in time, in the origin of the universe, the time disappears because the universe or actual model, which fail to identify what was before, tend to think about a moment in time where the time did not exist. You know, when everything is stretched together in a pseudo Big Bang singularity, the time disappears. And so here we can open the question about God and there is some interesting stuff.
So that's why we say the Big Bang is not a theory that dismisses God. I would say that Big Bang, if you accept that theory, which is not a problem for us Muslims, because we would say, okay, well, who caused the Big Bang? You know, there has to be a point that gave rise to all that we have now.
Sure.
But it also has to be a point which does not have a beginning itself.
Yeah.
Because if that has a beginning, then you keep on asking for beginnings.
But I think that it's the same time that we are trying to identify the origin of everything,
of course.
Original life. we can go in the direction in which the final cause is God, but maybe God have a cause also.
Well, then you have it.
And so this thinking, we can having this in a spiritual way, because but we can also have this in a.
But you say you are scientific,
physical,
right?
yeah.
Okay, so then I expect you to be scientific and rational in the thinking process, yeah? And I think Islam offers the most logical, scientific, what you want to call, information about what we are here and who is God. For example, if we start with God, there has to be a point in history that gave rise to everything. But if we keep on asking, but what made that, and what made that, and what was the cause for that, well, then you end up with a infinite.
Yes.
And for example, if I would write a letter now, and I would tell you, okay, send it to the king, but then you have to wait for my permission. I have to wait for permission of thee, of him, of him, of him, of him. What do you end up? The letter will never be sent. The letter is sent. The universe is here. So it means there has to be a point that gave rise to everything. That's what we say. And for us, God.
I'm not deterministic, so I'm not saying God doesn't exist. I do not say that science is true in everything.
Okay.
I'm just saying that science is trying to identify where do we come from and how the thing work in the same way that the religious.
I think it's a difference between religion and science. Religion gives you the reason why you are here.
Yeah, the two main things. So I'm accepting both of them. I'm more oriented to physics and science. The main reason is because science gives me the choice to having a conception of thing and saying, okay, I was wrong. In fact, it's working like this, which the evolution of model of understanding of universe. When we try to understand the origin of everything, it's important to not be sure at 100% that things are working like this and be, okay, our theory of Big Bang, maybe it's wrong, and science is ready to say, okay, we were wrong. And
I would say science doesn't say anything.
Yes, but for
science
example,
is a concept.
It's the methodology of science how to work. For example, if you think about Quran, God believing or Bible, something will never be changed. It's God always exists, and we will never be able to say, maybe in fact we are wrong, it's not God, but something a little bit different than God, and maybe stretching, limiting our reflection about does God exist or does God don't exist and life have no sense at all.
If there is a God.
If there is a God.
If there is a God. Would it not be the most rational thing to say that God doesn't change? If God has a system in place and he creates people and then he sends laws, are we going to say, well, 10 years later, God was wrong then, we are going to change it now because we know it better as human beings? So do you understand my perspective? As a Muslim, believing in one creator, I'm not going to say, okay, now we have to change his ways because we have changed.
Sure.
So in science, definitely, we say science has to evolve. Why? Because now we have material by which we can see certain things which was not possible in the past. But the ways of morality, the ways of what is the goal of this life, what will happen after death, these things, if you are going to say, well, we are going to change those things every time, well, that's problematic.
Yeah, I totally understand, and why for so long the humanity have been very interested. I've believed in different gods,
Why do you think
much more.
that all these people, for example, you believe in evolution, right?
Yeah.
So let's say from one singular cell, all life emerges.
I think the difference is conception of things. So you have different period in time. So for example, if we take by century, we have more or less Jesus Christ, and starting to 500 or 600, we have the Quran and Islam who bring a lot of who get developed over time. And after we have like 2nd century and our time, with very technology-oriented stuff. Yeah. But we have also some ancient belief. So ancient, maybe something older, like with maybe Hinduism. Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, something like this. But before that, we had something, but we don't have a lot of writing. For example, the Greek, was believing in things like Zeus.
Yes.
Zeus was controlling the thunder because we didn't know what was the thunder and the sky. And they had the god for Cupidon, for love, or Ares for the war. And it's so strong, like the love is very complex principle. If we don't have any understanding of this, we are creating some entity who give us some understanding. And in time, some of them disappear. And we have a lot of learning to have from the Bible and from the Quran, which is more recent and sometimes more interesting stuff. But I think that we passed a new way in which we understand much more better the world. And we have also to ask ourselves, okay, we all believed in God for a long time. But we can also have interesting stuff in science. So how can we manage this to have a balance and having part of believing in God maybe, but also understanding that we have new teaching outside of this now.
Until there, because you mentioned very interesting points. And I would say...
Sorry for being...
No, c'est bien, pas de problème. It's great. Because then I can also learn from your points. But now you give me a theory, and you are a scientific person, so we are going to use those words. You give me a theory of why you think religion became important for people. Okay? So I ask you about religion, you say, well, people started using names for certain things they found around them, and that's why they used those religions like Zeus and everything. Okay. This is your theory.
Yes.
Okay. And I would suggest another theory.
No, not really. It's not a theory, but it's what I learned in the history of the humanity in school.
Yes, but then now you're assuming, because you say that science changes. So now, for example, the historians of now would say, okay, well, we find in history this. This is our explanation for it.
So science and God believing is not totally incompatible. We have some compatibility and be both scientist and believer. And they are accepting both, and everything is good in their believing. When I said you that I get interested a lot in Bible and Quran for understanding what is said, is because in some point science bring response, advanced response to human question that sometimes Quran lack to explain.
What in life? Now you give an example. What does science give you as an answer which Islam doesn't have for
for example, life creation. I don't want to be negative. I'm really respectful.
You have to be completely honest in your question.
You have kind of a Genesis. It's not Genesis, but kind of Genesis in the Quran, where we explain how the things have been more or less created, and it explains how God created human, or how the baby are created, and it's explaining that it started by creating a bone, and we have like additional stuff which have been added, like if the skeleton was the basic stuff of a baby, of a human, and step by step we create everything. This is how it is explained in both Bible and Quran. New science shows us that it's really different. So we have two cells and they grow, but the bones, which is inside our body, is the thing we came last. So for example, I don't understand why science shows that, and we know that it's true because we had a video of this and really advanced research on this, which is very clear how a baby is born and grow. But
until
spiritual...
otherwise I have too many things to answer.
Sorry.
So let's stop this.
For example, we think about the difference between baby conception based on science and baby conception based on Quran.
Okay.
There is a difference, right?
First, Quran doesn't say anything about how a baby started to... the whole process is not completely detailed explained.
No.
Why? Because Quran is not a scientific book. That's first. So it's not the same as Genesis. Not at all. What we know in the Quran is that Allah created the world in 6 periods. Not days.
Periods, not defined in time.
Yeah, not defined in time. Then you have the when Allah says, for example, different verses in which He speaks about how the human is created, where we are made from, where we are made of, about earth. Sometimes He says clay, sometimes He says blood, all different kind of things. It's not to explain to us what is the complete process of how a human came to existence. So the question of how exactly came the human to existence is not important for your goal in this life. You have to research it. You can research it. And we're talking about scientific method, right? Ibn al-Haytham, which is an Islamic scholar of the medieval period, he was the one who introduced the scientific method. And this
Arabic culture brings so many stuff in.
Yeah, definitely.
Science,
it's not to be proud something. No, it's something to know that we as Muslims, we say the world and science has its place. You have to understand, okay, how does this work? How is the clock working? Can we do this?
And in a more general way.
Definitely. But it's not absolute truth. We say science, as we had 100 years ago, we had the steady state theory. Everyone thought that the universe was exactly how it was, no movement, anything. New material, new observations, and now we have the Big Bang theory. Completely different. So which shows us, okay, science is moving on, people are changing their mind based on new observations.
إن الدين عند الله الإسلام